The opinions you hear on Your Mountain from individual hosts or guests do not necessarily represent those of Your Mountain, our sponsors, or other entities we're affiliated with professionally or otherwise. You've waited long enough. Go listen to the show.
There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is Your Mountain.
Hey everybody, welcome back for the post-Thanksgiving episode of the Your Mountain podcast. I'm your host, David Wilms. I'm still recovering from tryptophan overload, and I'm joined tonight by Mike McGrady and Nephi Cole. How are you guys doing?
Never been better, David.
Good.
I'm excellent, Dave. Thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent is better than still here.
I was actually wondering if Nephi, if you had to up your Monster energy drink dosage post-Thanksgiving to counteract the tryptophan effects.
You know, it's kind of a slow year for turkey this year because we didn't have family over. My entire extended, interestingly enough, both my parents, two of my sisters, their husbands, all their kids, everybody got COVID. So literally, it's all the people that were supposed to, my parents were going to come for Thanksgiving, and then my little sister was going to bring her family. But nope, it was just this little batch of coals, and everybody is fine. So if anybody had any questions, they sailed right through it with literally no issues, and so
I'm really glad. Good. I'm glad to hear that they're doing fine. I was really wondering what it was that could. I mean, our listeners know that Nephi is constantly asking to get into Dave's goose pit.
Yeah.
And Dave and I on Thanksgiving morning were in that goose pit by tradition.
Yep.
Invited Nephi, and he said no.
Couldn't do it. No, because it was just the Coles at home. It was me, my wife, and my two boys. And so, can you imagine the amount of grief I would have gotten if I would have abandoned my family on Thanksgiving when there's nobody else? My wife doesn't get to see her parents. There's no siblings coming over. It's just us. And I'd be like, hey, honey, I think I'm going to go spend. Oh, by the way, I'm the one that's supposed to be doing most of the cooking this Thanksgiving. I'm just going to take off.
You just described my Thanksgiving only with goose hunting.
Yeah, we left so early in the morning that no one was awake. I'm
not an attorney. I can't afford my own divorce.
We were halfway through our goose hunt before our families even started waking up.
That's right. And I asked my two children, do you want to, my girls, do you want to go?
Yeah.
And my oldest has said, I'll get you set up on a shotgun. You can go. And I told him we were leaving at 5:20 in the morning. And she looked at me. She's like, no.
So just so everybody knows, to Mike's point here, Nephi, you missed out. We had a good time. We shot some geese.
Well,
and we still got to have Thanksgiving dinner and Thanksgiving afternoon and evening and all that good stuff with our families.
Well, I smoked
so we've
turkey.
established this tradition. I'm glad you smoked a turkey, but we've established this tradition.
Goose.
We did smoke goose.
and those goose are going to make great meat pie.
I would have loved to join you, honestly. Just didn't work.
All right. Well, I just want to make sure.
That was my one invitation of the season, Nephi. I don't know what to tell you.
Okay, Dave.
No, I'm kidding. We'll get another time up there. I promise. We're going to find another time to get out. And it's on the record.
All right.
But people don't want to hear about this ongoing goose hunting, goose pit saga that seems to revisit every couple episodes here. Most people probably want to know what the heck's been going on in the world of conservation over this past few weeks. And we're going to run down a few things. Let me just really quickly touch on what we're going to talk about today, just so you kind of have an idea. We'll roadmap it out here. A lot of people have probably seen the update on the Pebble Mine. We're going to provide our own spin, our own update on Pebble Mine. We're going to talk about Colorado wolves. We're going to talk about the right to hunt and fish in a new state. We're going to talk about other ballot initiatives that passed in November during the election in other states. And we may even touch on the, I don't know if it's a controversial topic, but it can be to some, the issue of corner crossing. And so that's kind of the rundown of today. Where do you guys want to start?
I'd say let's follow your list.
All right.
Pebble Mine.
Pebble Mine it is. All right. So unless you were really busy in the past week, doing Thanksgiving stuff, family stuff, that sort of good stuff, you probably saw that the Army Corps of Engineers last week denied the permit to develop the Pebble Mine in Alaska, in the Bristol Bay area of Alaska. And if you want to know all kinds of detail about Pebble Mine and the Bristol Bay area and what that means to the economy of Alaska, you can search our archives, and we have an episode, and I can't remember off the top of my head which episode it is, but a great episode talking about the Pebble Mine and the prospects of it. And I believe what you'll find back there is we made some comment, and I think, if I recall, it was Mike may have actually made this comment of how, predicting that Pebble Mine was never going to get developed.
Yeah. So episode 77.
All right. So check that out.
Yeah.
And Mike's prognostication has come true.
Yeah. Well, so far.
Yeah,
So far.
Exactly.
As if it's like, it's one of those gifts that keeps on giving. It's the William Perry Penley of mining petitions. No, I think it's pretty dead. But yeah, we predicted that, and not sick of being wrong. But that's exactly what we expected.
Now, here is one thing. I mean, we say it's probably dead. There's still an opportunity for the mine developers to appeal this permit denial, right? And so it's administratively dead at this point, or it's dead or on life support or whatever you want to call it, but it's not dead yet, because they've already suggested that they are going to appeal this decision. And we don't know what it's going to look like, but we do know that the same Army Corps of Engineers that denied this permit to develop the mine wrote a fairly favorable environmental impact statement not that long ago. And so I would suspect that there might be some challenges with respect to the two different administrative processes. But the EIS, the environmental impact statement, the EIS, and I know Michael want to jump in on this. It's really, you're checking. Yeah, I see him. He's getting excited to jump in. You're really checking. You're really checking the boxes. You're doing your analysis of what the potential impacts of your decision might be. It doesn't prevent you from doing something if there are potential environmental harms, or harms to the human environment. Right? You just have to acknowledge what they are and analyze what they are. And so I think it's probably a difficult hurdle to say, well, we got this final environmental impact statement that proposed a preferred alternative, and then we were denied the permit for one aspect of that alternative by the same agency. Sounds interesting, but I don't know.
It's one of those weird things where NEPA is the toothless wonder, in that you have to analyze and disclose to the public all potential significant impacts to the human environment. And you can, as long as you do that, you can make the dumbest decision in the world. But in this instance, it demonstrates that it doesn't mean you have to make a decision. NEPA is bifurcated from the whole, is this something the agency wants to do or not? And so perhaps this is an instance when NEPA worked through the process, disclosed all of the potential problems, and wise decision makers made a decision according to the information in front of them, rather than whatever else could have been involved. But it's there's a difference between that decision by the Army Corps and NEPA. And a lot of times, this is a major permitting decision. The Army Corps of Engineering permit that they were seeking is one of the major significant permits they had to get in order to move forward. So while this could run through a litigation process, there are other permits involved, and there are potential other decisions that either are up or down, and other processes involved in it. So that's why I said it's for now. So
Right. And to maybe wrap a bow around this piece on the NEPA and the permitting side. On the NEPA side, you do this environmental impact statement. The agency might identify a preferred alternative, but a preferred alternative doesn't necessarily mean a permittable alternative. Right? It's preferred, but you still have to go through the permitting process, and permits have conditions and they have to meet other environmental laws. And in this instance, for example, Army Corps of Engineers said that this project was contrary to the public interest, but that the permit application did not comply with Clean Water Act guidelines. So they were fairly specific in the reasons for the denial. It's almost certainly, the company vows to appeal this. Almost certainly it'll be appealed. Maybe you can find an arbitrary and capricious argument here. It seems like it'll be challenging considering the administration that denied the permit. Just speaking candidly there. Yeah.
Well, and you mentioned the Clean Water Act, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act, which is a big component of a lot of these water issues. But I always love it when you hearken back to the Rivers and Harbors Act of 1899 as one of the bases for the decision making here. It's anytime you're dealing with a law that is that old and it's still around on the books, it's always amazing to me because there's so many laws that have been passed over the years that we seem to have forgotten about, but that's one that sticks around.
Yeah, that and the 1872 mining law, right? There's another one that's been around for a long time and hardly touched, but it's very consequential.
It absolutely is. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Nephi, did you have anything you want to add onto the Pebble Mine discussion? I have one other thing, just from irony standpoint.
I don't think that I'm not going to add anything substantive.
I just have one thing on the irony piece of this, right? So there are the Pebble Mine was proposed for copper, gold, and I'm going to completely mispronounce this critical element, but it's
molybdenum.
Yeah. I wouldn't have pronounced that correctly, but
molybdenum.
Yeah, I was going to go with molybdenum.
Yeah.
But that is on the list of critical minerals, right? And the great irony in this decision, if there's irony in it, is that earlier this year, the Trump administration issued an executive order, right, to prioritize critical mineral development in the United States. It was, I believe, that was
part of it was a multi-year initiative, right? I mean, that they were doing a call for information on what is a critical mineral, and they define critical mineral as those minerals for which we have to import from countries that are not necessarily friendly to the United States. Those things we're very highly dependent upon, and most of the time that is stuff that goes in your cell phone, your rechargeable battery for your car, things like that. And they have placed that into regulation and are continuing to look at ways in which to expedite the permitting process on whatever it takes to search out and refine those particular precious metals and rare earth minerals.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it became an administration priority, but there's bipartisan support really for carving out a path to produce critical minerals domestically. And to clarify one other point, non-fuel, they were, the definition meant non-fuel source as well. So oil, natural gas, that sort of stuff, except for uranium. Uranium is listed as a critical mineral, although there's some dispute about whether it should be or not. That's still, there are some that argue it should be. But,
right. Yeah. It's one of those that fits the definition of most of the stuff that's getting imported is coming from countries that may not be friendly to the United States, despite the fact that we have a domestic supply that's in great abundance, especially in Wyoming. Whereas your other minerals, critical minerals, they don't exist here, and we have to figure out ways to get it to the United States from.
Or they do exist here, and we just simply don't mine them.
Right. Yeah.
Because there are other sources where the mining is already operational and it's cheaper to import those minerals right now. I think cobalt is probably a pretty good example of that type of a critical mineral. Anyway, I just throw this out there in that for an administration that was pushing so hard for several years to put together a strategy to develop critical minerals onshore in the United States. And there was a mine sitting there 20 years into the process, ready to do just that. And that administration denies that permit for that mine. That speaks volumes in my book about how problematic that mine may have been for other parts of the economy and for the salmon, in particular the salmon fishery up there. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I think it's also demonstrates the importance of having good relationships with your representatives and senators with the administration.
Well, if you recall, the company that was proposing Pebble Mine was recorded saying on a lot of recordings saying we have the greatest relationships. Right? That may have come back to bite a little bit too.
My point being that the delegation from Alaska that were coming out in opposition, I think, went a long way with administration that may have normally been friendly to the project.
I'd like to.
I think that's right.
I'd like to throw on my pragmatist hat and say it also is an example that sometimes it doesn't matter whether it's a Democrat or a Republican in office and what their priorities are. If you have a project that runs afoul of science and law and, it's just not going to happen, it's not going to happen. It doesn't matter who's in office.
Yeah,
because if the laws are built correctly, it's not a political issue. It's an issue that boils down to the truth and boils down to the science of it. And that's, I'd like to believe that in the Pebble Mine case, it doesn't matter how bad somebody wanted to build that mine. The laws are what they are. And you're going to come to the same conclusion. You might come to it with a different spin, but it doesn't matter what the politics of the guy in the White House may or may not be. These are the laws. And we are a country ruled by those laws, not by a politician.
So to transition to the next topic, I want to know what is going to be the next thing that gets everybody upset and focuses their attention and fundraising.
Bears ears. Going out on a limb. It's going to be national monuments again.
I mean, that's going to happen. I think you're right. That's going to be one of the first things that happens.
I can't wait.
In January.
We can argue about all the stuff we've already argued about again.
Yeah, and it won't be just Bears ears. It'll be Grand Staircase, and it might even be a push for some other designations as well, in addition to re-expanding the existing. Right?
Why would we do something new?
But on the mining front, though, Mike, just so you know, we're going to see a lot of resources focused more on boundary waters, I would suspect.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's going to be an interesting one. That's going to be an interesting argument.
So Colorado's got something fun going on based upon a ballot initiative.
They do.
That will hit some headlines.
It already has. Yeah.
Colorado is always good for sport.
Except football, apparently, because they don't have a quarterback.
You got
to bring that up, Dave. It's been tough.
Do you need one of those?
I'm a huge Broncos fan, and so I'm with you, Nephi. Today was really
painful.
It was really hard.
And at the same time, kind of fun because you didn't ever expect to win. So
it made me tune in.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd like to see this. Felt
like an Adam Sandler movie, except it didn't end like an Adam Sandler movie.
No Adam Sandler.
Apparently you can't do it.
Yeah. He's not the water boy.
Yeah. So the Broncos played without a quarterback today, thanks to COVID-19 and the NFL's rules.
They had a quarterback who did an admirable job.
They had somebody who played quarterback.
He completed one pass. Well, 3 if you count the 2 to the other team.
Yeah, 2 interceptions. Okay. But the guy stepped up last second and hadn't been quarterback for how many years? Practice squad coming
more
up.
Than one.
That guy had to have some nerves of steel in order to pull that off.
Oh, I don't think. I think he was scared the whole time. But
but
good on him for doing it. I mean,
first snaps are at when you walk on the field of practice, like before the game.
Right.
They threw him to the wolves.
There it is. Bring us back. Thanks, Nephi. Colorado Wolves. So in November, and a lot of you probably seen this too, but I want to dive into this one a little bit. And we've talked about this before, but I'd like to talk about it again. So on the ballot, there was a ballot initiative proposed, basically meaning people went out and got the appropriate number of signatures across the state of Colorado necessary to put this measure on the ballot to force the state to pursue the reintroduction of wolves in Colorado. And it passed, this ballot measure passed by on a razor thin margin. If you'd asked me 1 year ago when I found out this was going to be on the ballot in Colorado, if I thought that this would be a 51-49 vote, I would have thought you were crazy. Because I suspected this initiative to pass with 65-70% of the vote because Colorado is so dominated by the Front Range. And I just figured that's what would happen. But it was incredibly narrow. So the vote total was 1,543,000 and change in favor of it versus 1,504,000 and change opposed to it. So razor thin. Yeah. Demographically, and this is where I wanted to go with it a little bit. Demographically, there were more than 36 counties in Colorado, almost all the rural counties that opposed reintroduction. The places where the wolves were going to go.
Yeah,
and
the places where Colorado is or California isn't.
Right, and there were 13 counties, including the 6 most populous counties along the Front Range, that voted in favor. Now, there were some smaller counties that when this argument's been made by some saying, well, all the rural counties opposed it, there's some that have chimed up and said, there's some West Slope counties that have supported this, or Continental Divide type of counties that have supported this. Like, okay, dive in a little deeper, and it's like the counties where you'd find, what do you think?
Ski resorts and condos.
Yeah, you got it. So the same California, hate to say it, but
it's
the same California influence, second home stuff, or new first homes that people have just moved and bought places there. Because if they're second homes, they probably shouldn't be voting in a Colorado ballot initiative. But, right, obviously they're not going to vote in their second home. And just so everybody listening knows, we're doing this through Zoom, and my internet connection is terrible tonight. And so you might lose me a time or two. Stick with us.
It's okay, Dave. I'm going to pretend like it never happened. Never happened.
All right.
That issue never happened. You didn't disappear and then, leave Mike and I on here for 15 minutes and go get snacks and come back and sit down with your hot cocoa and whatnot. You didn't do that.
Perfect. I'm still here.
Yeah, but, a question on that. So if you would go into a little bit of detail, Dave, I think that this is important, and I think you guys can explain it better than anybody. Tell everybody. So we had wolves coming into Colorado naturally, right? There were already some there.
Yeah, that's correct.
What happens? What's the difference when you look at the ESA and look at how this works? What's the difference between now saying we're going to introduce them with the state's going to do it versus having them come back naturally? How does that frame up differently in a nutshell?
Well, so I think the challenge that you have right now is the fact that you do have wolves coming back in naturally. If you didn't have wolves in the state, there's a mechanism. There's a couple of layers here, but if you didn't have them coming back, there's a mechanism in the Endangered Species Act that allows. It's called an experimental non-essential population, or just an experimental population. So you can create what's called a 10J population for wolves. You can only do an experimental population reintroduction in a place where the animal doesn't exist right now. So you're going to draw this boundary, reintroduce these wolves in this experimental population, and then one of two things can happen. In this instance, they would have been considered experimental non-essential because there's so many wolves other places that they're not essential to the survival of the species. The species is going to be fine without this population in Colorado, right? So you reintroduce them in Colorado under an experimental, and they are treated, even if they're listed as endangered nationwide, they're treated as though they're threatened. So it gives you more regulatory flexibility. I'm boring Nephi so much that he's playing with crackers over the screen. But it gives you more regulatory flexibility to deal with damage claim and work on social tolerance on the landscape for these animals. You cannot do an experimental designation, this 10J designation, if you already have wolves on the landscape. So in the places where wolves have moved in and might be expected to expand in the near term anyway, you wouldn't be able to do an experimental population. So it limits that in under the ESA. But remember, wolves aren't listed under the ESA right now.
That's right.
Right. Or at least the final rule should go into effect here shortly. There's a nationwide delisting for gray wolves, which will impact Colorado. They'd be delisted in Colorado. So the ESA, at least until the litigation runs its course, won't be applying in Colorado. But the issue, the issue is still, you have wolves coming in naturally. You have a Parks and Wildlife Department that are populated with biologists that are, they've got large carnivore biologists. They've got experts in the field, in their profession, on staff at Colorado Parks and Wildlife that can put together a plan for how to deal with wolves when they come in on their own as they're doing. Where can we have them? Where, how will we work with landowners? How we work with the hunting community and others to, recognizing that these wolves are coming in. And when you go through a ballot box process like this that forces you to look at introducing wolves in particular places, you're taking some of the decision making out of the agency. You're telling the agency you have to find a path towards putting them in places rather than
managing when they arrive.
Right, which is what they wanted, which is what the biologists wanted to, is manage their arrival rather than forcibly put them there, right? Yeah. So you're tying their hands a little bit on how they do things and under an accelerated timeline. And as you can learn lessons from how things worked in Wyoming and Montana and Idaho in the mid 90s, and actually going back several decades before that. The reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone, which happened in that 1995 timeframe and in central Idaho, it wasn't proposed by a ballot initiative in 1994 or 1990. It's a process that started shortly after they were listed in the mid 1970s, right? So they spent nearly 20 years trying to build support to have them on the landscape and put them in a large national park and incredibly remote places in Idaho. And it was still incredibly controversial and remains so today. And it remains a very challenging social dynamic and issue for how do we manage these on the landscape? And that was after decades of preparing for it. Here you're forcing an agency to do it under the same thing under an accelerated timeline as well. And so I think there are just some challenges there.
But I mean, just to be clear, the ballot initiative doesn't say tomorrow there'll be wolves on the landscape.
That's right.
It has a process involved in which it directs the Game and Fish Commission in Colorado to develop a plan, but also to take some time to engage with the population to say, give me the information I need to understand what the implications are of this, and also to set up a process for if the wolves are introduced and there is predation upon livestock and things like that. It sets up a program similar to what we have in Wyoming. And in addition to kind of making sure other components of the law are complied with. So this is just the start of a process. Now, it gives a very clear indication that this is what we're ultimately going to do. But there's a lot of room for the public to get engaged on all sides on the issue in Colorado.
Yeah. This is a kickoff, not an end zone dance.
I agree, but I think if you look at the timelines that are suggested, they're still rather aggressive in the grand scheme of things, of bringing something back that's been gone for 100 plus years. Yeah,
reintroduction by December 31st of 2023. That's basically 2 years. Of a process and granted, this is not. For the reintroduction, this is going to involve more than just the Colorado Fish and Game or whatever they're called down there. This is going to involve the Fish and Wildlife Service and other components to it, right? Other states, because you got to get those wolves from somewhere to reintroduce. There needs to be a program for the transfer of that. So it is aggressive schedule, but
Yeah, you also have, you may or may not have the Fish and Wildlife Service, right? The one thing that isn't accounted for in this aggressive schedule is the fact that you're going to have a couple of years worth of litigation over the nationwide delisting rule. And does that rule stick or not? Or does a Biden administration come in and decide, you know what, that's one of the rules we're going to look at rolling back. We're making some changes to and proposing changes to this nationwide delisting. And so this could be caught up in sort of a legal, I don't even know the right adjective, but
morass.
That works, but it's going to be, that works well. It's going to be caught up in that for a long time. I've been thinking for a while, even though this initiative was proposed and passed and gives direction, I still don't think you're ever going to see wolves reintroduced in Colorado. This is just me personally, because I think what's going to happen is as that whole timeline plays out, wolves are just going to continue to expand naturally into the state, and they're going to decide, you know what, we don't need to waste all this energy and resources on developing a reintroduction plan, and building holding facilities and finding wolves to bring in. Let's just manage what we got.
Yeah, King's X is done.
Yeah, right. I think you're right.
Mission accomplished, right?
I think you're right if they can figure out a way to take credit for that. And that's kind of the issue right there, is because as much as you like to believe that it's, people are going to stand back and rationally look at this and say, they're coming, don't worry about it. The reality is that the reason that it's on the ballot is because some people wanted to make a point. It's political. It's not a reality of the animals on the landscape. It's the issue. Whether or not you're going to get them or not, it's political. And so what you are going to see is, I think you're right if the people who voted, who wanted to see the wolves there can bow, take a bow and say, yep, we did it. We've got a plan for them getting back there. And even if their plan is just to let them wander, southward, as long as they can take credit for that plan and then, put a notch in the right box, then I think you're going to be right.
Yeah, you might be right about that. Here's why I wanted to talk about this, though, because I think this is a microcosm of a much bigger issue, and one that you have seen borne out in national elections as well. And it's this urban-rural divide issue. And we've talked about it some here. But This Colorado wolf ballot measure is the perfect example. You couldn't draw it up any more perfectly of this urban-rural divide, where you have this, this largely urban population making decisions that largely affect the rural population without actually having a real dialogue, just trying to force it on them, right? Without actually having an open dialogue and discussion about how this could possibly work on the ground. They force it on them and say, we're going to vote this in, and then we'll talk to you about how we're going to do it, right? And I think that this is just a microcosm of a bigger issue that we have nationally about why rural America feels like they're ignored in a lot of instances, because this is a perfect example of where rural America was ignored. Did they have a chance to go to the ballot box and vote? Of course they did. But they're outnumbered. Yeah. Outnumbered, out fundraised, outgunned, right? They're just, and they're having something forced upon them. I'm not anti-wolf. I'm not trying to suggest that I'm anti-wolf. I'm just trying to suggest that I think there's a better way to do business. And as we transition into our next topic here, I want to pose this to anybody that's listening that works in a field that might be able to pull this off, or even a couple of my colleagues on this podcast. I would love to see a push for constitutional amendments in states to end ballot box biology. I would love it. I don't know what it would look like. I don't know how to write it. But I would love to see it stopped. This ballot box biology.
For sure, it starts with notwithstanding any other provisional law. And then you just make it up.
And then just whatever you want after that point.
Yeah. Those are like magic words. You just put at the beginning and it works.
There's been a concerted effort over the past several decades to do what we're talking about next, which is adopting constitutional amendments to protect people's rights to hunt and fish. I'd love to see us do something similar to prohibit ballot box biology. So, I'm just tossing that out there. Ballot box biology basically meaning, and I know Nephi's talked about the tyranny of the majority a lot, but forcing your own interests on somebody that most of the. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the overwhelming majority of the people that voted in favor and against wolf reintroduction, both sides of this, don't have the first clue about the biology of wolf reintroduction, right? But they're making a decision one way or the other for the state, right? And telling the state, this is what you need to do biologically. I don't think we should be doing that. I don't think we should be in the business of doing that. As
constitutional amendments. There's a time and a place, and there's a way to get things done. And constitutional amendments, state constitutions, is not a place to pick a point in time where we agree on or we think this is the right thing for a particular species. Not easy to change, not easy to undo. Or even if it's a proposition that results in non-constitutional ideas, right?
Right, as in the case with this one,
Yeah, I guess, in my mind, I always think of the time in which the state of Florida had a constitutional amendment that dictated the size of a pin for a pig. A domestic pig, right? In the
size of a what? A pin?
A pen.
Yeah.
The
pen.
holding facility.
P-E-N. Pen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, living space.
Right. So, that's in the...
but Florida pretty much does everything through constitutional amendment, it seems.
I know, but there's got to be a line. Isn't there a point where these things are better handled through other means than just the general population deciding to amend the Constitution to cover something as parochial as that issue, while important to some, can't be handled by other means? And sometimes the initiatives are good because it forces the legislature to wrestle with things that they normally would not take on. However, there's got to be a line, right? Because you need to have involved a lot of other learned people around a process.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There are times and places for ballot initiatives. Right? There are times and places for constitutional amendments. There's a reason why some states don't allow any ballot initiatives at all, right? Because we have a representative democracy, right? You have a problem with what's going on, just vote somebody else in, vote that person out. But then there are some states that allow an initiative process, but make it exceptionally difficult. The bar is so high that it's only for the most exceptional things that the legislature it's almost, the public is viewing it as almost a derelict of duty of the legislature to raise to this bar that it has to go to an initiative.
Yeah, to express the will of the public in initiative versus, which is, different than, we talked about a constitutional amendment. Sometimes these things are entirely different. So you've got
But now you've heard my proposal. I want to see, since we're about to talk about constitutional amendments, I want to see some.
I don't hate the idea. I just need to see the language
to stop it.
I
know. Let's work on it, man.
Because how do you do that? Because almost here. Here's the challenge: is you have to make a statement in your constitutional amendment that says basically, we're not gonna micromanage the world. Really, that's the statement that you have to make, is to say, that's what you have to do. Is just, that's what you're looking at, is letting people do their jobs, which in a perfect form of government, ideally that's how we would do everything, is we would give everybody a nice box with general requirements for what we want them to build inside that box, and then we would stand back and let people innovate inside that box rather than dictating everything down to the nth degree that everybody has to do. And the problem is with government these days is there's a great deal of excitement about dictating everything everybody has to do. And so, it's challenging, Dave. It's challenging.
I'm not saying that the legislature can't get in and dictate that and say, pass a resolution or pass a bill saying we're going to reintroduce wolves, right? The legislature wants to do that. That's their prerogative as the legislature to direct their executive branch to make it a law for their executive branch to do something. My issue is then where we take something away from the legislature effectively, like the people that are elected to represent us, and take it away and do it through this this ballot box process.
One of the things that makes it difficult is also each state has a different process. And you touched on it. In some states, it's extremely hard to get something on the ballot. It takes signatures and it takes an act of the legislature first, and things like that. In other states, it's really it's much simpler. And so, but that's the world that we live in. That's our republic. It's what makes it unique. It's what we love about it. But at the same time, that's what makes it challenging to work across these multiple states.
Right. I'm not going to say any more about it, except let's figure out a way to stop it. The ballot box biology. There's a time and a place for things. I don't think initiatives are the place for biological decision making. That's just put it in the hands of the biologists to make recommendations. If the legislature doesn't like it, or if the governor doesn't like it, there are processes to stop that. Right? That's what the political process is set up to do. Anyway, but there are places where amendments.
You're the guy, Dave. Lead this effort.
Yeah. I don't know about that.
Why are you poking at us?
Because I think you might be the guy.
I think you might be the guy.
But I think you might be the guy because you're the guy.
But I think you're the guy.
But you're the guy on constitutional amendments to hunt and fish.
Right? You know what? What a great amendment. Utah, God bless Utah. Right? Constitutional right to hunt and fish.
Utah just became, I believe, the 23rd state to constitutionally protect the right to hunt and fish.
Representative Casey Snyder, job well done.
Yeah, and
First year representative. Can you believe that? First year representative comes in, has a desire to take this bill on, and does it. And so,
do you remember what the vote total was? How much it passed by? It
was like 75% of its support. So in the legislature, it was actually really close, and that's one of the things that was really unique about this. Is in the legislature, you have to get 2/3 of the legislature has to sign off on it before it can hit the ballot in Utah for a constitutional amendment. And so Representative Snyder had to get it through committee, he had to get it through the House, and then in the Senate, he almost didn't get it, and he was able to really work and get that one additional vote that he needed to put this on the ballot. Then once it hit the ballot in Utah, it only had to have 50%, simple majority on the ballot in Utah to pass, and it crushed it. Everybody in Utah absolutely jumped on board, and it just shows kind of where Utah's, where they are at on these issues, and it was really a nice affirmation of the importance of hunting and fishing, in Utah, which. Interestingly enough, if you think about that, so they passed the constitutional right to hunt and fish. Utah gets a lot of black eyes, don't they? I mean, people like to poke at Utah and be like, oh, Utah, they're not public lands friendly. They're trying to sell all your land, blah, blah, blah. But guess what?
Your state's shaped like a toilet.
Your state's shaped like a toilet. All sorts of stuff. But if you look at but now step back and think about this. 75%-ish of the population of Utah voted for a constitutional right to hunt and fish. So anybody that thinks that Utahns aren't crazy about getting out in those public lands and hunting and fishing, you're just wrong. And so this is definitely, it's proof of that. So there you go.
Yeah, and I had a question for you because I noticed that vote total was the state overwhelmingly supported it, which is very consistent with other Western states that have it, although there are a number of Western states that should but don't right now. But my question to you, Nephi, is what were opponents, like why was it so close in the legislature? What were opponents saying to get traction?
I think some of the argument was that it's unneeded. And you hear that in a bunch of different states. People, even people because if you are pro hunting, you can still make that argument. Like you and I could look at it and say, hey, what's the big deal? This isn't really anything that's going to happen now. But ultimately, the argument that wins the day is this. And again, it's 2/3. It has to win, 2/3. So folks who are opposed to it, they may be in the center, but more of the folks that are on the opposite side of this argument. What they're saying is, they don't want to have that constitutional right to hunt and fish, and they will tell you, their argument is you don't need it. Don't worry about it. This is not something that why would we touch this? And then they're going to say, an argument that came up was that it's going to cause mass poaching. It's like you pass this, then everybody's going to think if you pass the constitutional right to hunt and fish, then it's just a misrepresentation of truth. They act as if passing that amendment suddenly is going to lead to an explosion of people just rolling around and just shooting everything everywhere. And so part of the discussion that was necessary in order to make this work is to let everybody know that this guarantees basically what it's doing is just codifying what we already have and saying constitutionally it's going to stay, that hunting and fishing is the preferred method of controlling and managing wildlife. And that was part of, that was really important to the argument and also is important to actually make the Department of Natural Resources feel good about this, was to understand that this isn't, nobody's saying that they're going to take away, your management schemes or your ability to do that. This is simply saying that we're going to continue to do things that way, that we're going to continue to use the North American model of conservation, and that's going to be enshrined and not taken away. And the reason that that's important for people to say, oh, this will never happen, it does happen. It does happen. It happens slowly, but it happens when you go to Alaska and you don't let natives harvest and take game the way that they used to. It happens when you go to Colorado and you can no longer bait bears. You can no longer use, hunt bears with, the traditional ways. It happens in New Jersey when they outlaw bear hunting on state lands and where the governor says we're just going to get rid of bear hunting altogether. That's how it starts. It happens in California where we're dealing with things like big cats. It starts with picking a charismatic megafauna, right? Like, let's just pretend a wolf. It starts by saying, like, you know what we're not going to do? We're not going to let anybody hunt wolves because they're like dogs. Well, as soon as you start down that road, what else is somebody going to like? Then it becomes a public, it's like ballot box biology. It's what animal does somebody want to have in a t-shirt tomorrow to try and convince the majority of people that maybe don't agree with hunting that animal is being singled out. And so universally, and you know this, when you look at the acceptance of hunting as a management tool or the idea of hunting, universally, even though most people don't hunt, they accept it. They're okay with that. They don't have any problem with it. They're good with it. Especially when you add parameters on, like what you use that for, what you use the meat for, what not. But where all of this comes apart is as soon as you take an individual and you make something about a single individual animal, Frank the ferret, or, Eddie the eagle, or whatever it may be, when you make it about one animal and then you make it about, you take that picture, suddenly people change. And it's really easy to get the majority of people to say, you know what I want to do? I want to save Frank the ferret. I want to save Eddie the eagle, or whatever it may be. And that gets applied wide scale. We see this in a lot of things that we deal with. For example, let's talk about lead and raptors, where maybe you have, the populations that are doing better than they ever have, but you have a sick bird goes on TV, and what happens? It changes people's perception, and suddenly it's no longer about population level controls. It's no longer about management that is scientific and makes sense. It's about an emotional connection to a single animal or a single species, or a perception that may not be reflected in the biology on the ground. And that's why it's important that these states codify these things, because if you don't have real strong protections for hunting, for fishing, then you really do stand a risk of losing these things as soon as you get in a situation where the majority, where you have a political will gets to a certain percentage of the population, and people just decide that, you know what, we're not okay with you hunting that way or that thing anymore. And that's why this was so critical in Utah. It's why it's critical everywhere.
Yeah, it's never about, well, not never, but it's very rarely about the now, right? It's passing these constitutional amendments, the right to hunt and fish, in most cases hasn't been about we're under direct threat today in these particular states. It's been, we're starting to see an erosion in some places, and we know that could happen here in the future. We're protecting against the future. And if you wait until the future to do it, it might be too late.
Absolutely. I mean, you can see it with a lot of different issues there are a lot of rights that are even codified in our Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, where people are challenging what people should, how people are able to exercise what we might even consider fundamental rights, because the view of what, today's view may be different than the view was 100 years ago. And again, you talked about this urban-rural divide. There's just a different perception when you live in location A. There's just a different world. When deer, what you see on the big screen, in at the Cinemax, and like when that's your perception of deer and they talk to you, maybe you don't like hunting deer then. And so that's what you're running into. That's what you're working against.
It's also why we have to be, as hunters, such good ambassadors for hunting. The constitutional amendments to hunt and fish, these rights to hunt and fish, can only go so far, right? Because they can be undone if the will of the people changes. Right? They have to be passed by, in most cases, a 2/3 majority. I guess you said in Utah it was an even 50% or just over 50%, but it varies state to state. But it can be, or maybe it has to get out of the legislature with a 2/3.
2/3 out of the legislature. Yep.
Yeah, and then it goes to the population. So if you only need 50%, and you said in Utah it was what? It passed with the public with 70, 75%, something like that. Yeah.
2-1, 3-1.
What happens if we as hunters aren't good ambassadors for hunting, and we do things that start turning the non-hunting population against us? That 2-1 margin starts to shrink. Yeah. We don't want to risk losing that either. Yeah,
it's evident in a lot of stuff in politics today. People are so passionate about these political issues, and I don't want to digress into talking about one specifically, but people are so passionate on those issues that you get these, let's just say it's 3% of the population that's that's just super animated about one issue, right? Well, what they don't realize is that, like, most of the people in the middle of the country, they're not as excited about the issue as you are. And on the opposite side, there's going to be some people who are just as excited about the opposite as you are. If you're in this kind of these outlier communities, most of the country's kind of in the middle. And the problem is, living in that outlier community, if you offend people, if you drive people away with the veracity of your message, if you can't win them over, if instead you thumb your nose at people, and ultimately you're going to lose the argument. It doesn't matter how right you are. If you're so self-righteous in your assessment of everybody else being dumb and you being your idea being the way that it has to go, you turn people off. You don't win friends. You don't win, you don't pull people over to your side. And that's the challenge is, if you want to be a true believer in the future of hunting, you can't just say, I'm a true believer in the future of hunting, so I'm going to kill everything and I'm going to tie it to the front of my car and I'm going to rub it in your face. You do you lose hunting. Because if because everybody isn't going to agree with you ever. You're not going to get the majority of Americans to be okay with you, rubbing it in their face. What you have to do is, it's okay to feel passionately about those things, but you have to bring everybody else along with understanding that they are not as passionate as you. You have to create a way for them to enter the front door and to come join you. You have to make that tent big enough that there's a spot in that tent for them. If not, you'll lose it all. And it doesn't matter how much, it doesn't matter how strident you are about your issue. And your issue could be hunting, it could be firearms, it could be public lands, it could be any of these things. you have to build a community of compromise, and you have to build a community where it can be bigger than just you. If you don't, you'll lose the argument in the long run.
Yeah, we are the current trustees of our heritage, right? Of this hunting heritage. We are the current trustees of it, and it is our responsibility to be able to pass that on to the next generation of trustees. And these constitutional rights to hunt and fish set us up to do that, but we have to be good trustees too. So your point is spot on. Couldn't have said it any better.
Bring people in. Bring them in a warm and friendly way. Don't make them. They don't have to be they don't have to be Dave Wilms to in the hunting world. They can just come in the door and then they can just start. They don't have to sell all their. They don't have to sell 2 kids and to be able to afford sheep hunts or whatever right off the bat.
Right.
That's why Dave keeps getting kids.
Because eventually I'm going to sell them for a sheep hunt.
Yeah.
That just took a dark turn.
Well, Dave.
All right. Anything else either of you want to talk about on the Utah right to hunt and fish before I talk about a couple of other ballot initiatives?
No.
All right. Nephi?
Big thank you to everybody in Utah who passed that bill, and people like Steve Ranella, who took an interest in it, and he brought Casey Snyder on there and talked about the bill. And he's not the only one. There are a bunch of people that realize the importance of it and then use their voice to reach out and encourage people to inform people and help people make good decisions. So good on you, everyone.
And now Montana, Colorado, we're looking at you. I don't think either one of those states have a constitutional right to hunt and fish. I might be wrong. Maybe one of them does.
I think one does.
If it is, it's probably Montana.
Yeah, I think Montana's got something similar.
Is it Idaho that doesn't have one? I mean, there are some what I thought were kind of obvious candidates here in the West to have one that doesn't yet. While Nephi's looking that up, I'm going to transition to our next topic. So we did a deep dive into the Great American Outdoors Act. So everybody that's listened to us knows the Great American Outdoors Act passed, and it fully funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund in perpetuity at $900 million a year. We're not going to talk about that anymore. But what I found interesting as I was scanning what was going on in ballot boxes in states around the country this November is how the momentum that had developed at that federal level around the Land and Water Conservation Fund last year to permanently reauthorize it, and this year to permanently fund it. And obviously we've talked the purposes of this, or there's state purposes and federal purposes, and some of it's going to land acquisition, access easements. Some of it's going for parks and trails and all sorts of things. Anything you can really think of in the outdoors. What I found fascinating is that across the country, from sea to shining sea, there are states building what I would just call LWCF lights, this Land and Water Conservation Fund light at the state and local level, like recognizing the value of open spaces and habitat for wildlife and good water quality and parks. There were a number of ballot initiatives that passed across the country relating to conservation funding. For example, and I'll give you just a few quick examples, and then we can talk about it a little bit if you want. So a few examples. There were three different counties in Florida that voted to increase their property taxes. And collectively in those 3 counties, those property taxes will raise almost $500 million for land conservation programs, land acquisition programs, water quality improvements, wildlife habitat protections, and parks and other things. Right? So at the county level, they were identifying the value of these open spaces and parks to residents in those counties, and for the wildlife viewing and so forth, just the quality of life in the area. In Montana, we talked about this, I think, in our last podcast. Montana passed a ballot initiative legalizing recreational use of marijuana, or decriminalizing it, however you want to, whatever you want to call it. And they said 50% of the sales from that will go to land conservation, which is projected to be $360 million over 20 years. That's a lot of money that can go to land conservation, whether that's creating opportunities for access, land consolidations, new acquisitions, whatever it happens to be, improvements, invasive treatments, habitat restoration. Like, all of this could potentially be included in this. That's a big pot of money available there. And then, so that's at the state level. So I've said county, state. Now at the local level, the city of San Francisco, the voters there passed a proposition for a bond that would direct a portion of the bond, or $239 million of this bond, to parks and open spaces. So the citizens of San Francisco voted to say, yep, let's issue bonds, and let's use that to develop more parks and open spaces for the citizens. So all over the country, at all these different levels, you have citizens coming to the ballot box and saying, I'm willing to pay a little bit more to have these open spaces and wildlife viewing opportunities and habitat. And I think I haven't seen any studies on this. I'm just hypothesizing, but there seems to be a connection between this many years push at the federal level for LWCF to now saying, yeah, we need it at the local level. And some of this might be, we need some matching money to get this LWCF, some of these federal dollars, right? So maybe some of this is to be able to get matching dollars, but some of it's going to be for local projects completely funded at the local, state, or county level. And so I just observationally found that very interesting.
Yeah.
And,
on the San Francisco initiative, you would think that things that go to parks and open spaces are going to pay for swing sets and pavilions, but Golden Gate Park there in San Francisco has a pretty fantastic archery range that's been there for a long time. And so it's a pretty good chance that some of that money is going to go towards keeping archery alive in that big city.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And you're probably, and maybe other things too. Right. And that's one of the things, this is the reverse of this urban rural divide, the San Francisco dilemma, right? We are blessed beyond measure where we live to have the opportunities to get out on public lands and in wide open spaces, basically any opportunity we want. Blessed beyond measure. And I think as part of the rural community, maybe we take that for granted, like as part of flyover America, maybe we take that openness for granted sometimes. And then you think of a city like San Francisco or New York or LA or Houston or Chicago, these places where, there are kids that maybe have never seen a green space. There might be teenagers that have never been to a green space. Their local park that they go to might be completely asphalt, right? Their playground equipment, basketball courts, playground equipment, whatever you have there, they may not see green spaces. And so to have these types of initiatives at the local level to open up outdoor opportunities for kids in big cities, I think that's a huge component to helping bridge the urban rural divide too, is creating opportunities for people that live in these urban settings that maybe wouldn't otherwise get to experience the types of things we do. And they're going to experience it differently. Their parks and trail systems and, their open spaces are going to look a lot different than ours. But every study I've ever seen suggests that open spaces lead to better mental health. They're like critical to the human psyche. And so I think these are pretty powerful initiatives as well, as a way to kind of help bridge that urban-rural divide as well.
I have stuff that I think is funny to say. I just don't want to. Maybe it's too. I was going to say Katniss Everdeen. She needs a place to practice her with her bow too. So, for the.
Yeah. No, but I get to your point, Nephi. I mean, your to seriousness around your point is we did have an interview pretty early on in this podcast in which there was a female who got into archery because there were not other opportunities for shooting in the San Diego area. So there was a city park that had archery range, and then she ended up being pretty good at archery and competing at high levels. And so, sometimes you got to figure it out with the local needs and what's available. And we all love to be able to hone our skills at hitting the target. It's just sometimes you got to do it shooting. Sometimes you get to do it archery.
So digressing now, actually, both Idaho and Montana have the right to hunt and fish in their constitutions. Just thought.
Do they?
So, yeah. So for those of you who are about to get angry, Colorado doesn't. Neither does South Dakota.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay. And that one ought to be a slam dunk. Like, South Dakota, that should be one that, that one's worth some blood and treasure there.
All right. So Idaho and Montana have it, and Colorado needs it, and South Dakota needs it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pivot off of this really quick. I'm going to introduce a topic very briefly because I think this is one we should dedicate maybe an entire episode to. But since I mentioned it at the beginning, I feel like I should at least mention it here at the end so it doesn't look like I completely forgot it. Right? I mentioned corner crossing. Right? So what do I mean by corner crossing? Well, I mean in places like Wyoming, where we are, other public land states in particular. Think of your map as we'll just use a general example of think of your map as a checkerboard, right? And you're on the red squares and you want to get to the other red square. Well, man, Nephi, I gotta lose it with your face.
This is the subject. I'm just going to tell you what I said when you said we're going to talk about corner crossing. I said, this is an issue. We could literally do an entire episode talking about corner crossing, access issues, trespass issues, different literally. And I bet people would. I bet we get I think we do it a disservice if we just say, "Hey, let's talk about corner crossing for 30 seconds."
Right. I think that's how I led this, was saying that's what we're going to do.
Tee it up.
So I'm just teeing it up. If you'd been you were daydreaming or something, you didn't even hear that part.
It's pretty late.
I was doing exactly what you wanted me to do, Nephi. I was doing exactly what you wanted.
Nephi was giving a face that I've never seen in my life. So I wish the listener could see it, but then again, maybe not.
No, I don't think anybody wants to see that.
You know what I love about Zoom? When you do Zoom meetings, do you watch everybody else or yourself, Dave?
I watch everybody else.
Mike?
Everybody else, and then I distract myself. Because there's a time lag. You're like, wait a minute, what?
Just wondering.
No.
Go ahead.
Back to corner crossing. All I'm doing is explaining generally what it is, and then we're gonna cut this off. Sound good, Nephi?
Sounds good.
All right. So just so people who are corner crossing, think of it like this checkerboard. You're on a red square and you want to get to the next red square, right? So you're going to walk to that corner and jump across that corner so you don't touch either of the black squares, right? That's the idea, because the black squares are private land and maybe you don't have permission on those, and so you're trying to avoid that. So you're going red to red, public to public. There's a controversy around that, whether that's an actual legal access move. Is it legal to make that jump?
Yeah. Even though your foot never touches black.
It is not legal.
Red to red. Yeah. There's still a question.
There is absolutely a question.
I don't think there's a question if they don't think it's legal.
Well, you're probably wrong about that, Nephi, but we'll get to that in a future episode. I think there's there is an open question about whether that is legal or not. And what we'll do is we'll dive into multiple states. We'll kind of see what it looks like and the landscape is in different states with that. But the reason why it's a big deal is because you have a state like Wyoming that has more than 2 million acres that, as the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership noted in a report that we talked to them about, that has more than 2 million acres that don't have a legal right of access, public land acres. And a lot of those, not all of them, but there are many that could be opened up by corner crossing.
So here you go.
Legally make that jump. So
you are about to make TRCP very, very angry, because if corner crossing is in fact legal, think about how wrong their report is when they said that Wyoming has all this inaccessible land that suddenly now, Dave Wilms, you have just let the entire world know it's actually accessible land.
What I have said is it's debatable, arguably, very arguably debatable. And there are some interesting nuances that I think are worth exploring.
Absolutely. The next episode is going to be called It Depends.
It depends. I like that.
Depends.
And then it's going to, and then because we have some attorneys on the podcast as well, it's going to be also the next one after that will be It Depends. And then after that will be Bring Your Checkbook.
Maybe.
Yeah, right. Well, the one before It Depends is going to be everything you're about to hear does not constitute legal advice from either Mike McGrady or David Wilms. Nephi Cole will be dispensing legal advice throughout the entire episode.
Mine are just opinions, and I don't belong to the bar, so therefore,
right. So you're practicing law without a license,
which is still you don't have to belong to the bar to have it violate the law. So. I think this is a great opportunity because it is a good topic where, especially in parts where we like to hunt, where you could access a lot of land and save yourself hours of walking if you were able to corner cross. And I'm really curious to know the listener experience on what it is like in their area. I think we have a decent grasp on Wyoming, but other states, other parts, what's that access and what does it mean? How does it affect you? And so if the listeners out there could really chime in and kind of tee it up, we can bring some examples to that episode where we dive into what that corner crossing issues are and try to provide a good explanation across the United States.
I love it.
I think that's brilliant, Mike. I think that's brilliant.
So where can they access us in order to provide that information?
I do.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Nephi.
I just want to throw this out to think about and for everybody to talk about too, as you're providing this, and for us to think about. The other challenge is this is not just a legal issue. It's a social issue, as much or more than a legal issue. For example, you have a state
now
like
you're diving
Wyoming.
into the episode.
Yeah. And so, and that's what you need to realize. It's about more than just legally can you cross. The problem is maybe legally you can, but what is the culture of, you getting to that place? And then you're going to have all these social issues associated with who's going to be angry at who for what, who's willing to write a ticket for what, who's willing to fight for what. And so it's going to get deep.
And if it is legal, does it quickly become illegal? So all the things that we can talk about on that episode. But to Mike's point, right? I want everybody that's listening. I would love to have our inboxes flooded with this one. Like, what are your personal experience? First of all, give us your personal experiences around corner crossing if you have any. Give us your personal opinions. I'd love to hear your opinions around corner crossing. Shoot those our way. If you happen to know what the law is in your state, let us know. Point us in the direction to find more information. We'll start diving into this and try and cover as much as possible, but we're going to need your help. This is a big, complicated topic involving many, many states. And to do it justice, we're going to need your help. So let's just say this is a plea for information. Send us what you've got. Give us your input. And you send it to yourmountain@itsyourmountain.com. Or you can direct message us on our social media platforms. You can get us on Instagram or Facebook, on Twitter at the handle @itsyourmountain. So do that. Get us that information. Help us help you. Help us help you. Help us help you. Right? That'd be fantastic if you could do that, Mike. I think that's a great idea. So listeners out there, this is the first time we've given like an actual homework assignment, right? Homework assignment. Help us out. We could use this information. It'd be great. A lot of help. So thanks in advance. And then we'll pull that episode together. And if you have other episode ideas, include that in the email too. We always love to hear ideas, things you want to have covered on future episodes. Guys, anything else you want to cover? Or should we just wrap this up?
Wrap it.
I think it sounds good. Wrap it up. I had a question on what backpack to buy to put on my Christmas list.
I'm your guy.
But yeah.
Offline.
Yeah, maybe somebody could chime in with their favorite.
Mike, I have all that information. You don't need to ask the listeners.
All right. I'm looking for the lightest, best meat hauler.
It's Stone Glacier. Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, I have it. Just look what I'm wearing.
If the public wants to chime in, that's good too.
It's just no doubt, Mike, but fine.
That's what it is, huh?
Go get a whole bunch of opinions so you can figure out I'm right. I'm okay with that.
Well,
mine always used to.
Anybody wants to contradict oh yeah, well now you got the Kuyu, but
now I have Kuyu, but I used to run a Targus, which was a computer bag.
I had that same computer bag in law school, but I think anybody that wants to tell Nephi he's wrong, they're welcome to chime in on the same things that Dave just wrote. So
probably don't want to do that, people.
I like the Kuyu a lot, but I understand Stone Glacier is pretty solid as well. Targus makes a pretty good computer bag that will haul meat in a pinch. Anyway, send that stuff in. Help Mike out because
we'll make
Nephi's head gets too big at advising, on all the best gear to buy. Mike needs some.
I spend a lot of money, Dave, to formulate these opinions. Just remember.
I know you do. We all appreciate the opinions too. As much as you give me a hard time for being cheap, I'm still listening. I still listen to your opinions. And someday I might actually act on one or two of them. Actually, the Kuyu, for everybody out there, the Kuyu actually came at Nephi's recommendation several years ago.
It's a compromise.
Because I wasn't willing to go one more step.
No, because you weren't willing to step up to alpha.
Beta works pretty well. All right. I think that's a good place to end it tonight. It's pretty late. It's been a great Thanksgiving. Sorry for everybody that's been a couple weeks since you've heard from us. We're still dialing back into a routine, but thanks for sticking with us. Thanks for listening. Really, as always, really, really grateful for everybody that listens to this podcast. And until next time, remember that life is about experiences. So go have one.